Well, we have made our way to week 8. So you could imagine we're getting close to the end of this story. But this week we hit a pivot point, a major one, because we talked last week about how they had come together. They are rebuilding, repairing the wall against every attempt to stop them. One commentator refers to it as a triumph of concentration over every kind of distraction. I like that phrase. It's like it really was. And as we hit chapter 5, we have another distraction, proving that the dangers to the community are not all from the outside. If you look at Nehemiah chapter 5, we find there arose a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish brothers. Now, this phrase, a great outcry, is the sort of thing that, if you went back to Genesis, it would have been the great outcry that arose to God from Sodom and Gomorrah, or the great outcry of the people when they saw Egypt coming after them and they were backed up against the Red Sea. It's that level of distress. So we have a set of accusations raised. One of them is, with our sons and our daughters, we are many. Let us get grain that we may eat and keep alive. So there are people who are poor enough that they are not getting food. And the law had provided for that. If you go back to Leviticus, there's a place where it says don't strip your vineyards or your olive orchards all the way out to the edge. Leave some for the poor and the sojourner. And there's another section that says don't strip your fields when you harvest all the way out to the edge. Leave some for the poor and the sojourner. So something is going wrong here. And you go to the next one, and it's like each one adds a bit of detail to the situation. So the second accusation, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our houses to get grain because of a famine. Okay, so the people who have land, probably not the highest level, but your average farmer, they're having to basically forfeit the use of their inheritance as God's people just so that they can get grain. There's a famine happening. Now, if you've had a mortgage, you know that you're not just paying the amount. There's usually some interest thrown on there. There are also laws about that. We'll get to that in a little bit, though. But then you have a round of people who are like, we borrowed money for the king's tax on our fields and our vineyards. Our flesh is as the flesh of our brothers. Our children are as their children, but we're having to force our sons and our daughters to be slaves. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but it's not in our power to help it. For other men have our fields and our vineyards. So you can see there's a situation going on here. Things are not going really well. You can imagine a lot of the men are away working on the wall, leaving the children and the wives to manage the land. But also, there's a famine that's happening. You think back to, right, of course, the great famine that brought Israel into Egypt. And what was Joseph's strategy with the Egyptians? Well, if you want to buy grain, we've got grain stocked up. We planned ahead. So why don't you sell us your land? Well, there are people here, and the rules about land ownership are very strictly laid out in the law. That when you find yourself in debt and forced to sell your land, you sell the remaining time until the Jubilee. You're not selling the land in perpetuity. But these people are losing their land. They're having to borrow money to pay the taxes. Some of them don't even have land. can't buy grain. And so all of this comes to Nehemiah. He's already got all these distractions at hand from the outside. And now he finds out that the powerful among his own people are exploiting their own brethren. And his reaction, very typical Nehemiah reaction, I was very angry. Here's a man who is dedicated to doing the work that God gave him so that his people can be safe. And we'll find out later, he's doing a lot more than just the building of the wall so that he can take care of his people, bring them out of the disgrace they've fallen into. And here he finds that the other leaders are exploiting them. So here's what he says. I took counsel with myself. I thought about this for a little while. And I brought charges against the nobles and the officials. I said to them, you are exacting interest, each from his brother. And I held a great assembly against them. It's like he's putting them on trial in front of the community. And I said to them, we, as far as we are able, have brought back our Jewish brothers, brought back our Jewish brothers who have been sold to the nations. But you even sell your brothers, that they may be sold back to us. I mean, you think that the ridiculousness of that situation, where they're trying to gather their people again, and they're finding that their people are being sold out from under their noses, and then they're having to buy them back again. It's stupid. And of course, the defendants, as it were, the nobles and officials, says they were silent. They couldn't find a word to say. This really is a completely indefensible behavior. So we've got the charges laid against them. We've got the trial, as it were. The sentence. They've basically pled no contest. They are guilty. So what happens to them? Nehemiah takes the thing in hand, and first he scolds them. The thing you're doing is not good. Ought you not to walk in the fear of our God to prevent the taunts of the nations, our enemies? And the whole reason he came, remember chapter 1 of Nehemiah, was that he had found that they were in great disgrace and derision. The walls had fallen. Now they're building these walls back up, but they find out that what's happening inside the walls and in the communities surrounding the walls is enough to undo any improvement in their reputation that the wall might bring. And here we find out some more of what Nehemiah's been doing to take care of his people. Verse 10, moreover, I and my brothers and my servants are lending them money and grain. Let us abandon this exacting of interest. Return to them this very day their fields, their vineyards, their olive orchards, and their houses, and the percentage of money, grain, and wine and oil that you've been exacting from them. This is their sentence. They have to give back everything they've taken. But what can I say? They've already essentially agreed through silence that they are guilty, that they have no right to do any of this. So their response is, we will restore these and require nothing from them. We will do as you say. Nehemiah isn't satisfied with just that, though. He brings priests over and makes these people swear to God before the priests to do as they had promised. And then what doesn't really make sense to us, because obviously we don't think in this way, but it's essentially evoking a curse upon anyone who fails to keep his promise. Nehemiah says, I also shook out the folds of my garments and said, so may God shake out every man from his house and from his labor who does not keep his promise. So may he be shaken out and empty. Basically, evicted from the people of God. And the assembly said, amen. And they praised the Lord. And the people did as they promised. So there was a threat here from the inside of the community, and Nehemiah acts quickly to deal with it at its root, to not just penalize the people who were guilty of it, but to make known to the entire assembly that this is not how the people of God behave. That it doesn't matter if they rebuild the city into a beautiful edifice. As long as they're behaving like this, they are still open to the taunts of the nations, and they are not walking in the fear of their God, which, considering that's what got them into the whole mess in the first place, should have been a serious check to them, something to make you really think. So he's addressed the internal issue. People are now taking care of each other within the people of God. But Nehemiah is so diligent. He documents, in retrospect, what he did for his people in the entire 12 years he was governor. Starting in verse 14, moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year to the 32nd year of Artaxerxes the king, 12 years, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allowance of the governor. Pause there for a second. If you were to go back to Solomon, back in Kings, you would find that every month a different tribe was responsible for bringing a food allowance to the household of the king. And these were considerable. This is slightly different in the sense that it was levied on all the people, an extra tax, if you will, to support the house of the governor. And Nehemiah is saying, we did not take that allowance. We didn't exact that from the people. And he talks about who had come before him. The former governors who were before me laid heavy burdens on the people and took from them for their daily ration 40 shekels of silver. And we're talking, right, something like, we're in the kilograms, I think, of silver. But there's a possibility that the text refers to something more than that, because there's a footnote that the Hebrew says it took from them with food and wine after the 40 shekels of silver. So this would be on top of the tax, which would be a heavy burden indeed. The tax is bad enough. But then the former governors apparently had demanded more. And even their servants lorded it over the people. But I did not do so because of the fear of the Lord. I also persevered in the work on this wall, and we acquired no land. So he's working. He himself is working, and his servants and everyone who is affiliated with him. And they're not out there buying up people's lands. And all my servants were gathered there for the work, he said. And moreover, there were at my table 150 men, Jews and officials, besides those who came to us from the nations that were around us. Right? So he maintained a pretty sizable household in the middle of all this. And if he's not doing it on the food allowance of the governor, where is the money coming from? Well, verse 18 says, what was prepared at my expense for each day, 1 ox, 6 choice sheep, birds, and every 10 days all kinds of wine in abundance. Yet for all this, I did not demand the food allowance of the governor, because the service was too heavy on this people. And then there's a prayer at the end. It says, remember for my good, O my God, all that I have done for this people. And lest this should strike you as one of those sort of self-promoting, proud statements, recall what the cost is to people who have taken on the shepherding of God's people throughout history. I think particularly of Moses, who at one point broke down and said, Lord, did I give birth to these people? Why did you lay them on me? There's so much trouble. Well, here Nehemiah is like, I have done a lot for these people, oh Lord. Remember it for my good, because we're going to find that in addition to this issue with the financial exploitation from the upper to the lower parts of the people of God, that they are also contributing to the harassment from the outside. Because when we get to chapter 6, right, the wall has been built. The only thing left, really, is to set up the doors within the gates. And our old enemies, Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arab, and the rest, when they heard, he says, that I had built the wall and there was no breach left in it, although up until that time I had not set up the doors and the gates, Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, come, let us meet together at Akephirim in the plain of Ono. You have to have a little bit of geography to get what this really means. Plain of Ono would have been the furthest reach of the territory of Judah, right where it kind of meets the province of Samaria and I forget whichever other one, but it was essentially the outermost limits of where Nehemiah would have had any authority. And so there were a couple things that people speculate about this. One, they're trying to cause a delay by taking Nehemiah away from the work, because the journey would have taken time, and then any meeting would have taken time. And of course, that's the part that he addresses when he refuses. But there's also the possibility, this being so close to their own territories, it would have been a very isolated and remote place where anything could have happened to Nehemiah. It probably would have. So he responds to this message, I am doing a great work, meaning I have so much on my hands. This is too important for me to walk away from it for some meeting. I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you? They have really good reasons why the work should stop, but that's a perfectly valid response. Like, I have so much on my plate right now. I just can't stop right now and pay attention to you. And it says they sent 4 more times in this way. They're like always, hey, you need to come out and meet with us now. And Nehemiah answers in the same way every time. So the 5th message. By the way, if it was just a delay, probably they would have then had someone come from their local allies to do some damage to the walls. But what Nehemiah saw was they intended to do me harm. There is something of a danger in having only one moving force behind any project. I mean, it's in a way, it's really useful to have a charismatic figurehead, as it were, behind any sort of movement. But the danger behind that, then, of course, is how much relies on that person. And as we get through to the end of chapter 6, you will find that there were forces involved that in Nehemiah's absence would most certainly have harmed the process of building the wall. So discrediting Nehemiah then becomes their next goal. So this fifth time, it says, Sanballat sent his servant to me. He sent him with an open letter. We're quite familiar with open letters. They usually get published in newspapers. And their whole point is not to communicate a point to a person, but basically to create a dialogue. Well, in this case, it was to create a rumor. In the letter, it says, it was written, it's reported among the nations, and Geshem also says it. What makes him a... Anyway, but he also says that you and the Jews intend to rebel. That's why you're building the wall. And according to these reports, you wish to become their king, and you've also set up prophets to proclaim concerning you in Jerusalem. There's a king in Judah. Now the king will hear of these reports. So come and let us take counsel together. This is pretty smooth transition. The other request to meet was starting to sound kind of desperate. But this is a real threat. What he's saying is that he is going to, and has just now started trying to stir the rumor that Nehemiah is setting up himself as a little local king and means to betray Artaxerxes. And you know what happens when that sort of news reaches a king? You think about Herod, all he had to hear was that the king of the Jews had been born in a certain area of Bethlehem, and suddenly he's in a murderous rage. So the threat is quite real, because this open letter would have been shared all the way along as the servant went from Sanballat's headquarters to Nehemiah at the wall, and he would have stopped to talk to a lot of people. I'm sure it's like, I have this to bring to Nehemiah. So everybody is starting to become aware that this letter was on its way and what its contents were. But Nehemiah, he takes really the only sensible, in terms of a man of God, the only sensible response. I sent to him saying, no such thing as you say have been done, for you're inventing them out of your own mind. They just wanted to frighten us, he said, thinking their hands will drop from the work and it will not be done. But now, oh God, strengthen my hands. So he refutes it, not justifying anything, not making any arguments. He's just like, it's all in your head. You're making this up to try to stir up trouble. Knock it off. And then he prays. Lord, not protect me, did you notice? Protect us from this rumor? No, it says strengthen my hands. Make me more efficient at the work. And so he is trusting God to address the rumor and to keep the project moving. All right, so we've had 2 attempts, basically, 2 different strategies to prevent this project from coming to a close. But they're not done. Here's the 3rd attempt. Somebody named Shemaiah, son of Delaiah, son of Mehetabel. We don't really know who he is, but we know 2 things about him. One, is that he's posing as a sort of prophet. This confining to his home, we don't really know why, but we know it's by his choice because he himself suggests that he and Nehemiah go to meet together in the temple. Presumably, he would not say that if he could not leave his home. And it was not uncommon for a prophetic figure to do some sort of like object lesson, like shutting oneself up in one's house because of the to model the surrounding threat to Jerusalem, for example. So he has somehow gotten Nehemiah to his house, and he proposes, let us meet together in the house of God within the temple. Let us close the doors of the temple, for they are coming to kill you. They are coming to kill you by night. Some translations say tonight. Like this is imminent. You are in great danger. So the temptation here is to act in fear. But Nehemiah sees what this would do. And his response is, should such a man as I run away? And what man such as I could go into the temple and live? I will not go in. Yet think, the temple proper was the domain of priests. Other people had attempted to go in. You think of Uzziah. King Uzziah, I believe he was the one that it says he was mightily helped until he grew strong, and then he was too proud, and he basically decided he was going to go into the temple and offer sacrifices himself. The priests tried to stop him. He was, you say, fortunate enough to get away just with a lifelong case of leprosy, which kept him then confined to his home for the rest of his life. And Nehemiah says, I have no right to go into the temple. I'm no priest. And anyway, why should I run away? It's not like this is the first time they've threatened his life. He is trusting in God to strengthen his hands at the work and to deal with the threats on his behalf. And verse 12 gives us a retrospect, right? He's not writing this at the time. He's writing this in the future, thinking back on it. And verse 12 says, I understood and saw that God had not sent him, but he had pronounced the prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. For this purpose he was hired, that I should be afraid and act in this way and sin, and so they could give me a bad name in order to taunt me. So they were trying to disgrace him by provoking him to fear. You think about what happens to us when we are afraid. We have a tendency to act on our emotions. And Nehemiah sees that doing so would have undone, well, first off, his whole reputation. But if he'd gone through with it, he could have lost his life walking into the temple as one unauthorized to do so, because the presence of God was there. It's like people forget that this is the place where God had agreed to make his presence known to people. And you don't just waltz in and out as you please. But this is not all of it, right? So we've got this Shemaiah person. But verse 14 tells us that they were not the only ones, because he's praying to God, remember Tobiah and Sanballat, oh my God, according to these things that they did, and also the prophetess Noadiah and the rest of the prophets who wanted to make me afraid. Now here's a real issue, because these were not prophets from the nations. These were prophets from Israel that were getting bought off by Israel's enemies. False prophets whose only ambition was to intimidate Nehemiah. You think that he's got so much going on here. And all of this almost overshadows verse 15, which is quite dry in comparison. That the wall was finished on the 25th day of the month in 52 days. It's such a quiet statement. And yet, such a miraculous outcome. 52 days it took them to repair these walls. That's not normal. It isn't natural. It says, when all our enemies heard of it, the nations around us were afraid. Now, we're not talking like knees knocking kind of afraid. We're talking about they were awed and fell greatly in their own esteem, for they perceived that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. But the real part that I find the end of this chapter so disappointing in a way. Because, you have this triumphant, the wall was finished in 52 days. God helped us. And that's the only reason we could do this. But he ends the chapter saying, moreover, in those days, the nobles of Judah sent many letters to Tobiah, and Tobiah's letters came to them. For many in Judah were bound by oath to him, because, first off, he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, son of Ara. We don't really know who these people are, but given the effect of this relationship, they were probably high-ranking in Jewish society. And also Tobiah's son, Jehohanan. Some of these names drive me crazy. He had taken as his wife the daughter of Meshullam, son of Berechiah. Now, we've heard that name before. Remember, I told you last week to keep that name in mind. He had been working on the wall. He had done 2 sections of the wall. And yet, he married his daughter to this Tobiah, who is referred in many places as the Ammonite servant. Sidekick to Sanballat, as it were. And so all these people, for the sake of power, had intermarried with the enemies of their people. But not just that, the last verse, the most disappointing one in my eyes, also, they spoke of Tobiah's good deeds in my presence, and reported my words to him. And Tobiah sent letters to make me afraid. So the influential among his own people are complicit with this man who is definitely not acting in the interests of the people of God. But the people had acted. They had come together. The wall was built. Now that that part was out of the way, though, clearly there's some housekeeping that needs to be done. Next week, we will look at chapters 7 and 8, where Nehemiah decides to start the housekeeping. And this is going to go on for some time. And this is going to bring Ezra back into the picture. Presumably, he has been this whole time trying to pursue his own ambition of not only studying the law and doing it himself, but teaching others to study and to do it. And he will be a great help in the housekeeping efforts. But that is for next week.